I want to start off though by paying tribute to the thousands of Queenslanders who reached out and supported those who have been affected by severe tropical cyclone Debbie and the aftermath, which we saw so vividly on our TV screens, and many of you would have experienced firsthand. There's been a lot said, and there always is a lot said and written about the resilience of people in Queensland and about the community spirit that we share. And after I personally visited some of the impacted communities, I went to places like Proserpine, then to Airlie Beach and the suburbs around Airlie Beach like Cannonvale. I can assure you that what's said and written about Queenslanders is no cliche. The way that those communities came together, the way that people in those communities looked out for one another and had each other's backs is inspiring and it's remarkable. An example of that is the man that I met who had his excavator and his tipper trucks out on the cove at Airlie Beach, and he was there with his daughter-in-law, and they were there without prompting, without any expectation of pay. They just got straight out onto that beach and started cleaning it up so they could get tourists back into their community as quickly as possible. And this family that I met down there on the beach, they hadn't emerged from the disaster period unscathed either. They and their two families crowded together, 8 of them, on a single floor, as their home was torn apart around them. In the aftermath, immediate aftermath of that, rather than thinking about how they were going to survive, they didn't sit around and wait for someone to come and help them. Instead, they picked up their things, they got in their trucks and they went down to the main street and worked tirelessly to get their community back on its feet. Other people in places like Midge Point, which is south of there, they were cut off for power and cut off for water for days. I met a couple, Alona and Kerry, and when I caught up with Kerry, she just had her clothing washed, and she'd had it washed for the first time in many days, and she was able to do that thanks to a visit from an organisation that we're all very fond of, Orange Sky Laundry, who as soon as the cyclone had passed, fueled up the vans and took them to North Queensland. She was heard to say that having clean clothes on her that didn't smell for the first time in days gave her such a boost, that she felt so much better about going out and doing whatever she could in her community to assist it recovering from those floods. She wasn't concerned about herself, despite her home being without power and water for so many days, and she said, and I quote, "I'm someone who will speak up, you know, so I'm not worried about me. I'm worried about the people who don't feel like they can speak up, so I want to make sure that they are all right." And I want to pay tribute as well to all of those that swung into action, in particular our emergency service workers. We are so proud of them. Our power crews that fueled up their trucks from places north of Townsville, from southeast Queensland, and in particular my department's building and asset services staff and our housing staff that supported people in those affected communities. When we knew the cyclone was coming, we had our housing staff go and check in on our high risk and vulnerable tenants, so our seniors and people with disability, both before and after the cyclone, evacuating people where necessary, making sure that they were going to be okay and they had what they needed. And our building staff worked diligently to ensure safety and get important public infrastructure back up and running. When we made the call that we were going to have every single school in the state operational for term 2, it was a big call. And we made that call, and we did it bravely because we were confident in the capacity of Queensland public servants. But what they required them to do was commission things like helicopters to contract to get contractors and materials into some schools in some of the worst hit areas. And I say all of this because it's a testament to what we can truly achieve when we work together. Whilst I was up there and I was inspecting the damage, of course I was reminded once again that housing is far more than just shelter. A home, as we all know, is far more than just a roof over someone's head. And that's what makes this policy debate, absolutely so challenging. It was demonstrated by people in, I think, was the hardest hit community of Cannonvale, torn apart. If you haven't seen the images of that community, it was unrecognisable. It was really hit hard, but they refused. People in that community refused to move to the emergency accommodation that I made available for them, and I'll tell you why. Because they said to me, I don't want to leave my door unlocked or my house without walls on it because I actually have possessions in that home. They're the things that I hold dear, and I'm not prepared to walk away from them. And I think that illustrates the challenge of homelessness and housing. I'm going to talk a lot about that today. But let's never be fooled into believing that housing policy is simple. Of course, we all know that it's not. That's why we're here today. And I think to the untrained eye, housing policy looks complex and it looks very messy. But many of us in this room know that that isn't necessarily true. Yes, housing policy is multi-layered. It touches and is touched by almost every other policy area of government. It's a human need. It's a human service, and it involves, of course, a whole range of human emotions. Yes, it's vast, it's interconnected, but its problems are easy to understand if you look hard enough. The rubber hit the road during the last federal election when the federal Labor opposition did what was once unthinkable, and it took on the issue of negative gearing and capital gains tax. In early 2015, John Daly and Danielle Wood from the Grattan Institute wrote in the Fairfax Press that negative gearing is, quote, a untouchable tax policy. And they went on to say, moving to limit negative gearing concessions will not be popular. More than 1 million taxpayers have structured their affairs to benefit from these concessions. And they concluded that piece of work by saying negative gearing is a sacred cow that should be ritually slaughtered sooner rather than later. Now, whilst not committing to a wholesale ritualistic slaughter, Bill Shorten did pick up and run with a well-thought-out series of reforms around negative gearing and capital gains tax. And what we learnt from that election campaign, that it wasn't an act of electoral suicide that many pundits thought it would be. And I think that the success of that policy has dragged the now Commonwealth Government to the point where they need and they are acknowledging the problem of housing affordability. And fundamentally, and I spoke to a few people about this morning, it puts them in a very, very difficult position. Because real action on housing affordability requires them to turn against their personal and their ideological views that housing is primarily about the creation and the accumulation of wealth. The choices that we are called on to make as policy makers always fall upon two paths. There's those that encourage safe, secure and affordable housing for people, and those that support housing primarily as an investment vehicle. So when he spoke in Melbourne the week before last, the Treasurer said that he wouldn't foreshadow what's in the federal budget, which is true to form. We've seen that his strategy is to throw up a standalone element, throw up a balloon and see which way the wind and the poles, see which way they blow. It doesn't, I don't know about you, but it doesn't inspire much confidence in me that they actually have any meaningful or coherent strategy in this space. To appropriate the Federal Treasurer Scott Morrison's own language, I think they are neither taking a scalpel nor a sledgehammer to housing affordability policy. They, in my view, seem to be approaching it with something more akin to a spatula. Sure, we'll see some activity and a few flips along the way, but it's unlikely, I think, to lead to much meaningful change in the near term. But today I want to foreshadow some of the key directions of our strategy, the Queensland housing strategy, that will be released this year with the state budget, and it will follow the federal budget, which will be released on May 9. But before I do get to Queensland's approach, it's important that we do work through a bit of what we've heard from the Commonwealth. They're an important player in this space. In his speech, Mr Morrison proposed the same old tired prescription for housing affordability, the same wrong choice that we as a nation have been making for generations. Merely unlock new supply, open up more land. That's the answer. The Commonwealth wants us to double down on that strategy, double down on the strategy of sprawl that over the last 40 years has worked to clog the arteries of cities in Queensland, and particularly in southeast Queensland, but well known across the rest of the nation. So trying to combat our housing problems by continually pushing back the limits of our cities, I think, is a path to even greater social dislocation. We all know that we are reaching the outer limits of growth, and further greenfields development increases resource constraints. Let's think locally. Think about the Yarrabilba development in Logan. It's going to be home to another 50,000 people and around 20,000 homes. I've been down there, I'm from Logan. I know that it's 10 kilometres from the nearest handful, and it is only a handful of manufacturing and service jobs that exist in Logan Village. There is absolutely nowhere near enough jobs in that area to cope with the demand for employment. So what are we going to see? We're going to see people commute. They're going to continue to commute to the city. They're going to commute to the industrial areas. That's going to come with a very, very high cost in terms of both money and time. And of course, crucially, it's going to come with a high cost in terms of productivity. You can't build genuinely affordable housing on the outer fringes of suburbia. It may offer a cheaper sticker price, although the property pages do beg to differ, but what we know is that the overall cost of living in that home always catches up with you. Ventures into greenfield expansion that don't take into account the costs of increased emissions to our society are also foolhardy. What sprawl does is neglect the productivity gains that are to be made by embracing new 21st century urbanism. So increasing the supply of land alone can't do it on its own, because we don't have boundless plains anymore. Scott Morrison is on a well-worn path. As I said, highlight an issue controlled by states and councils in order to tap dance around negative gearing and capital gains tax discounts. It's a misdirection, it's a look over here, and it looks internal logic. He's at pains to point out that negative gearing is a tool used by professionals like teachers and nurses. But at the same time, in Melbourne, he said, and he accepted, that these are the same key workers who are finding it more difficult to afford to live in the communities of which they serve. And both can't be true at the same time, or can they? And it's no surprise that we know that only 12% of nurses and only 14% of teachers negatively gear. And we know that the proportion of people using negative gearing increases as income increases. So in selling the negative gearing message, the Treasurer completely leaves out the entry-level enrolled nurse. Now they earn $55,000 a year, and we know that their first hour's pay each day goes for paying for their parking. By focusing on policy that's primarily seeing housing as a wealth creation vehicle and maintaining what are significant distortions through negative gearing and capital gains tax at a cost of about $5 billion each year to the federal budget, what you do is you embed an unfair advantage to those who already have wealth. And it plays out in auctions in every city across the country. First home buyers are being beaten out by investors who are buying their third or their fourth or their eighth property, boosted by favourable tax treatment. So if you get on property sites like Domain, and they like to report on Sydney and Melbourne auctions as if they're a football match or some sort of competition, they run headlines like this one, and I quote, "Seasoned investor with 9 other properties beats out families in Leichhardt." And here's another one from the same genre, a quote from a young couple who were beaten by an investor in Sydney at an auction just in February this year. And they said, and I quote, "Thanks Sydney for destroying our dream of owning a home," Mr. Allison said half-jokingly. He said, "We're all part of the puppetry of the overinflated prices in Sydney." Last week, Senator Opposition Leader Bill Shorten released Labor's housing policy, which addresses some of those distortions head on. And cracking down on the explosion of residential investment through self-managed super is smart, solid policy. I want to talk about super a little bit. The use of leveraged self-managed super fund strategies has grown by a whopping 850% since 2012. And what that does is once again see those without an asset base crowded out by those who already have easy access to capital. And this type of speculation has also given the green light. It's given the green light to boiler-style wealth creation schemes which feast off the life savings of unsuspecting mums and dads. And in my other portfolio responsibility as Building Minister, I've seen the results of these dodgy operations far too often. We've seen unfinished houses, we see illegal phoenixing in the construction industry, we see fly-by-night operations. And ultimately what we see is people who are struggling, mums and dads and young families trying to pick up the pieces, left without their life savings, lost everything, little more than a dodgy unfinished home, a slab and some sticks, which is never likely to realise its potential. Because what you do if you create a giant honeypot of easy money is you attract the worst type of flies. In attempting to pull off his tap dance routine that I spoke about, Scott Morrison has also raised the issue of allowing people to access their super to fund a deposit for their first home. Well, the inappropriateness and, frankly, the stupidity of this idea can't be understated. What it does is move young people to place all of their eggs in the property basket, funneling them into a 40 or 50-year bet on capital growth in their property rather than the compound growth or diversified investment. You know what? It's really impractical in the first place, and I'll tell you why. The Association of Super Funds of Australia, its figures released in 2015 show that the median super balance of a 25 to 30-year-old, these are the people who are supposed to be accessing this super as a deposit for their home, the median balance is $10,000, just $10,000. And for a woman in that cohort, it's just $9,000. And 30 to 35-year-olds don't place much better either, with the median for men at $25,000, and for women, when you take in all of that gender pay gap problems, they report just $18,000. So their proposal asks young people to bet the house on their entire savings and then some. But thankfully, as Morrison attempts his tap dance routine, we see Matthias Cormann acting like Rogers to his Astaire and pulling off an undoubtedly complicated reversal of his boss's thought bubble. It's an idea that did deserve to be terminated, and I'm pleased to see that it has been. The fact that such a proposal was even considered at the highest level of government in this nation shows, in my view, just how out of touch the Commonwealth is. And what's more, the Treasurer talks about slow wage growth as our major economic challenge, while at the same time, they're gleefully allowing a cut to the real wages of millions of Australian workers who rely on penalty rates. And I don't think Australians are fooled by that double speak. I don't think anyone here in this room is fooled by it either. It's cynical and it's cruel to cut wages, to cut welfare, to cut health and education funding, to refuse to provide security of funding for housing, to refuse to provide security of funding for homelessness, to refuse to provide security of funding for remote Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander housing programs, and in the same drawn-out breath, cut taxes for the wealthiest businesses in this country. It goes beyond cynical. It's hypocrisy at its most craven. It's a well-worn political playbook though, and it's exactly what we've seen from the Treasurer so far. Now, I've been open with all of you about my concerns with funding agreements like the National Affordable Housing Agreement, but I reject the idea and I reject the notion that it's been used as a one-way ATM in Queensland. This state starts behind the eight ball in terms of investment in housing. We've had historically low public housing investment compared to other states, and we have the added complexity of a vastly decentralised state, and we have a significant role in supporting some of the most remote communities in Australia. Yet we consistently punch above our weight. And this was outlined in the recent National Report on Government Services. And we punch above our weight because we unashamedly take a hands-on approach to housing, and we face up in Queensland to the challenges that we must face as a government. And it's an approach that is paying dividends. But that approach and those dividends will be put at risk if the National Affordable Housing Agreement is scrapped or it's cut. And while I believe deeply in the need for funding reform across housing, absolutely I do, including the need for funding reform and delivery reform in remote housing and homelessness, Mr Morrison's attacks on the states in this regard fall well wide of the mark. I think it's just classic blame shifting in order to duck what is really a significant responsibility for the Commonwealth. Now, the Treasurer likes to reel off NAHA benchmarks to highlight poor performance, implying that social and public housing exists in its own tiny universe, separated from the challenges and the interests of the rest of the market. Building new social and affordable housing cannot solve housing affordability if significant distortions such as negative gearing and capital gains tax discounts are driving housing stress across the housing continuum. What happens at the top of the market and what happens in the middle are what happens down at the bottom. The subsidies that we provide to those at the top directly impact on homelessness and rental stress and the inability for working people to own their home. Even with all of its flaws, NAHA keeps over 70,000 households and growing in Queensland in secure accommodation. It supports integrated services that prevent homelessness and that help to sustain tenancies. And it also backs the Queensland Government's rolling capital program, which at this very moment is worth just a modest $130 million per annum across the state. At the point the Federal Treasurer is floating cuts to NAHA in order to fund his new bond aggregator, there is reasonable justification for people in this room to be extremely concerned. Now, I believe that new financial instruments are fantastic, and I fully support new ways of leveraging investment. But they aren't equivalent to funding housing services. You can't approach reform by starting by approaching a complete teardown. Nobody here, I think, believes that you solve the housing crisis by starting by making more people homeless. And homelessness support itself is still facing long-term uncertainty through uncertainty on the National Partnership Agreement on Homelessness. Just think for a moment, imagine the outcry. Imagine the outcry if every year our hospitals faced a funding cliff, where surgeries couldn't be booked, they couldn't be planned outside of the current financial year. Imagine that, but I fail to understand why homelessness services are given that treatment. Homelessness isn't a problem that's going away. The women and men, many of you in this room, are on the front lines working with homeless, the people who go into our parks and our alleyways at night, the people who take the calls in the early hour of the morning and on the weekends. They deserve certainty, and they need to be able to plan for service delivery. The Palaszczuk government in Queensland unashamedly takes a position that housing is a human service and that we are a human services provider. And being a human service provider is about obtaining better outcomes for people. Taking someone off the streets and housing them. Genuinely connecting people with other services to better their welfare. Effective human service delivery done well is an important and critical economic driver. Good human services policy is the foundation of a just society and a catalyst for efficient, inclusive economies. Like Medicare gives access to affordable healthcare, and affordable healthcare gives people the ability to participate in the workforce. Compulsory superannuation has given people increased retirement security through savings, and those savings are also unleashing investment in infrastructure in this country. It's unleashing investment in renewables. And if I have anything to do with it, it's going to unleash investment in affordable housing. Our task in addressing housing isn't just about making it easier for people to buy or rent, or getting people off the street or providing homes for the vulnerable, just as important as all of these things are. But by getting housing right, what we do is we supercharge the productivity of our cities. We expand people's opportunity to take part in the economy and share in its benefits. And importantly, what we do is we limit inequality. Of course, the inverse is also true. If we continue to stuff it up, which I think we've been doing for some time, we widen the gaps and we entrench that inequality that hurts so many Queenslanders. There's an easy cognitive trap people fall into by assuming that much of our housing policy is outside of our control, that it's somehow governed by mysterious forces. So, as I mentioned earlier, people's housing outcomes are always a result of decisions made by people. People like members of the board of the Reserve Bank, by people like Scott Morrison, a local council, or policymakers like myself. All of our decisions have a real-world impact on tens and hundreds of thousands of Queenslanders. And there is scope for real leadership in this space. And while we must manage competing interests, that doesn't discount us from adopting multiple approaches to fill the much-needed gap. Now, the Property Council plan released this week suggests removing the unnecessary costs of building. It's a good suggestion. And there is a lot of scope for leadership from local government on this, and I support it. I've started some of this work early with our Queensland Building Plan consultation, and last year our government passed the most comprehensive planning reform in a generation. And we did that because safe, secure, affordable housing has the ability to lift people up from despair, give them the base from which to achieve, and the chance to participate and the opportunity to belong. Our strategy that we released this year is about reforming service delivery so that it is truly person-centred. It is also significantly about reforming capital delivery. And that's about building the right types of housing in the right places at the right scale. And this requires a significant internal reform program from my department that I'm committed to deliver. Now, it ain't going to be easy, but we all will need to do things differently, and we recognise that. Last week, up north, I met with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander mayors. Now, we set a goal at that meeting from my department of slashing 16 weeks out of remote housing service delivery timeframes. That's a significant challenge, 16 weeks, 4 months out of constructing a home in remote Queensland, but it's a necessary one. Likewise, Better Neighbourhoods Logan, which I'll talk more about in a moment, is a significant departure from the department's traditional capital model. And it's these shifts that have framed the thinking that I'm taking into our state budget preparations, and it's these shifts that will outline what I see as the key framework for real reform. Last year in Adelaide, I spoke about how our system was, in my view, broken. Whether you're a small homelessness provider or the largest community housing provider, our current system isn't delivering what we need it to deliver. I don't think there's any disagreement about that. I spoke about how social housing has become the ultimate safety net, one that's just too hard for people to climb out of anymore. Now, I recently reached a diagnosis that most of you probably reached long ago. And I think we all understand the scale and the significance of what's ahead of us. So I want to concentrate now on the path forward. Excuse me. The collective challenge that we face at every level of government and as civil society and as community organisations is to unblock those arteries of the housing system. Now, our attention has got to be focused on clearing pathways for people. It's got to be focused on creating a genuine opportunity for people to be able to progress through the housing continuum. It will require significant construction of new housing, absolutely. But our solutions will go far beyond bricks and mortar. The State Infrastructure Plan sets a target of 10,000 new affordable dwellings needed over the next 15 years. And the work we're doing with Better Neighbourhoods, Logan, will work towards that target. And we'll also need to change how we provide our services, and we'll need to innovate service delivery. It's become increasingly clear to me that this work must start by ending the expectation that public housing is a home for life. Now, there's been a perception that being accepted into public housing is like winning the lottery, that you're set for life. And I've said many times that public housing has transformed into the ultimate safety net. And it's a net that's either too hard for people to climb out of, or that's far too comfortable for people to choose to stay in. In any case, by not providing proper avenues to move through the system, we are continuing to trap people there. And that trap's going to continue to exist unless we take meaningful action to recreate affordable housing for working people. We shouldn't forget that public housing never started off as a safety net. That's a very relatively new role that has developed. In Queensland, we started providing support for working people to buy their homes back in 1910. As the Depression later hit and working people struggled to manage their repayments to the state, we shifted to providing affordable rental accommodation for working people. And it's this model that we largely continue to operate today, catering to a much, much narrower constituency of vulnerable people. We saw soldiers returning from war, and the resulting population boom and increasing immigration all conspired to significantly increase the demand for housing. Between 1947 and 1971, the nation's population doubled. And from the mid-30s, there had been a significant contraction in housing construction, which was exacerbated by the war. So with an exploding population and a flat-footed construction sector, we took wartime action to provide housing for working people. And we catered to post-war aspiration. What it was government playing a role in securing a better future for working families, playing a role in building better lives. And I think the problems we face today are of a similar scale to what we faced in the post-war years. Very few of us deliver housing for working poor anymore. Our housing no longer facilitates people getting ahead. Too often, it provides a place for people to languish. Queensland has both the most targeted social housing system and the highest satisfaction ratings across the state, and that's admirable, and we're proud of that. It's something that successive governments and our service delivery staff that are here in this room should be very, very proud of, because what that does, it changes and it saves lives. But our ability to be a safety net is hampered by our own success. There is no way out of our nation-leading public housing system. What we do is we create a disincentive to achieve, and we trap people in our homes. Let me give you an example. Consider a single mum. She's on a parenting payment. She lives in one of our properties at Mount Gravatt. Now, what we want this person to do, what society wants this person to do, is get a secure job. And they want them to move into the private rental market. They want them to move along the housing continuum that we all talk about. To rent an apartment in the private market, in the neighbourhood in which she lives, and not be in housing stress, she would have to earn $73,000 a year. Now, I think we all agree that it's pretty implausible to expect somebody on a welfare payment of $18,000 a year to make an immediate jump to $73,000 a year. But that is the expectation inherent in our current system. And it's why the glib "get a better job" line that we've heard too often out of Canberra simply won't cut it. People remain stuck in the safety net because it's not even worth trying to climb out of. There are around 142,300 low-income renters currently experiencing housing stress in Queensland. And we've got to be honest, there is no genuinely affordable housing product operating at scale anywhere in this country. No product at scale that's genuinely affordable. NRAS is a short-term market discount product. It's not a product that guarantees actually genuinely affordable living for working people. The key to building smart cities is ensuring a diversity in our economy. And we can't settle for a situation where our key service workers are warehoused in the outer suburbs, subjected to those long commutes that I spoke of before. If we think about discounted market rent here in South Brisbane or in West End or over in Bowen Hills or at Nunda or at Mount Gravatt, it's still unaffordable for most people. Angliclear's report demonstrated that yesterday. We can't continue to pretend to talk about housing affordability without having a real definition of what that means. We can't continue to settle for affordable being confined to the latest development to open on our suburban outer fringes. This Wednesday, I asked the newly formed Queensland Ministerial Housing Council to join me in establishing a new definition of affordability, something that is based on people's real income and real housing costs rather than a simple discount to the market. Now, I believe that process will need to look at new eligibility limits based on incomes that are coupled with a new package of subsidies for affordable housing. It is only with a robust definition of affordable can we have a real framework that creates real commercial viability, that creates real financial viability for not-for-profits to grow affordable housing. And the need to tackle affordable housing is serious and it's urgent. 700,000 Australians are set to take a massive pay cut on the 1st of July this year. And while we haven't seen affordable housing at any real scale, there are some promising signs. Brisbane Housing Company, they've had success with some of their offerings. These offerings haven't yet been scaled to the size they need to be. And as a shareholding minister in BHC, I'm very keen to see this potential fully realised, and we're working on that. It's time to return our focus to supplying affordable housing, not simply providing a safety net. And in my view, community housing providers, there are dozens of you here in this room, you are best placed to drive this development. But it can only work if we subsidise it and we finance it in the right way. We can't unblock the system, we can't unblock those arteries if we continue as government and the community housing sector to try and deliver for the same clientele. There are limits to simply replicating safety net housing for vulnerable people. Community housing providers have told me you can't make it stack up on 25% of low income plus CRA model, targeted at the lowest income earners. Providers that I sit down and listen to accept the availability of credit isn't the only barrier. Security is needed around rent revenues, security that doesn't exist with community housing simply duplicating the role of a safety net housing provider. So that's why today I'm pleased to announce new funding of $1.8 million for Q Shelter to work in partnership with my department to develop a workable model for growing affordable housing finance across the sector. And I want this new model to provide a framework for the long-term sustainability of the sector, including the ownership of title of this new affordable housing. I'm not going to re-prosecute the failure of title transfer to deliver growth across the sector. I've done that many times. Except to highlight this quote in the recent AHURI Commission report, Ready for Growth. And this was a quote from a finance partner. And they said, when we, the finance industry, think about the capacity of the sector, it's very much constrained by the cash flow characteristics. The bottom line is that you can only lend against what the known cash flow is, therefore that is the constraint. For the sector to have notionally grown by $3.2 billion in 5 years without significant improvement in balance sheets or cash flows to allow that growth to be leveraged into more housing is a collective failure of policymakers. Now, I understand that the post-2013 world has sparked a minor existential crisis for the sector. I want to make sure that the next major investment in affordable housing is predicated on policy settings that don't lead to a further crisis. So that path requires clear roles, clear definitions, a thorough understanding of what the capacity of the sector is and how it can be leveraged, and meaningful, achievable and measurable long-term targets. And the commitment that I give to you today is that if you embark on this change with us, I will work with the sector to leverage our combined growth wherever possible. As I mentioned before, we're changing the way that we deliver new housing through our Better Neighbourhoods Logan initiative. We are assuming a role as a catalytic investor, creating partnership opportunities and creating a base for those partners to leverage off our investment. At its core, Better Neighbourhoods is about interacting with people, our tenants and the market significantly differently. We've listened to your feedback, we've heard from the market, and we've designed a streamlined, multi-layered process that slashes time, that slashes expense from the traditional procurement model. We have a laser-like focus on making sure that what we spend will demonstrate the appropriate yield. Better Neighbourhoods accepts that we don't have all of the answers, while positioning the department as a serious economic and commercial actor, working with industry and the sector for a specific purpose. We aren't taking the easy road of privatisation and transfer, getting properties off our books and developing the responsibility. Instead, we have to provide homes and housing services in partnership with you. Neither will we take the old school approach of throwing up some estates with the best intentions without much thought of the future needs of our city. And whilst we're changing the way we interact with the market, this is coupled with changing the way that we will interact with people. In partnership with Brisbane Housing Company and Churches of Christ, we have just completed a research project with our tenants in Logan about housing options. As a long-standing area of public housing, we have a significant number of seniors living in homes that just taking a cursory glance at the data, we wouldn't consider, none of you would consider suitable for their needs. And across the city, there are approximately 650 seniors that under the definitions would be considered as under-occupying homes. And through the research, we know that around 240 of those seniors would consider immediately transitioning to housing that better suits their needs. And you know how we know? It's because we went and asked them. And one of my predecessors in the previous government approached tenant engagement by writing them a form letter. They wrote a form letter to elderly tenants suggesting they may need to move or share their home with others. And it's telling that that particular approach was still being talked about during the research we conducted just a couple of months ago, with one older tenant saying, and I quote, "I was terrified. I was terrified of being forced out when the Housing Minister announced a few years ago that tenants would be moved out if the home was not suitable for their needs." That is an important reminder that a house is different from a home. And everything that we do needs to take into account the connection that people have with their home and the connection that they have with their community. So as we embark with our partners on our $1 billion 20-year pipeline of development in Logan, I'm absolutely determined to ensure that we never forget that we are working for real people who deserve dignity and deserve respect. And it's a dual-pronged program of change, changing the way we deliver our homes and making sure that everything that we do is focused on people. So the Queensland approach, which will be announced following our budget, will be comprehensive. It'll be ambitious and it will be targeted. And as I said at the start of the consultation around the strategy, it will provide a pathway for safe, secure and affordable housing for every Queenslander. And for me, that starts with our youth. We have significant power to transform the lives of young people for the better. I want to play a video that demonstrates that power.
I've been here for 2 years at the foyer now. So when I first moved in, I was actually homeless at the time. When I was younger, a bit younger, I was living with a bit of family and stuff like that. And they ended up having to move back to New Zealand due to different circumstances of other family moving back. And I think it was about 3 months I was just staying at random places, sometimes friends, but most often on the street and stuff like that. And on the last month I got into a homeless shelter in Brisbane.
I have 3 younger brothers. I got split up from my brothers when I was about 12-ish. Yeah, been in foster care since I was 5.
I'm from Congo. I came here in 2007. I didn't know English. I didn't know a single word in English. I didn't know how to read and write or use a computer. And when I left the house, I realized I didn't have anywhere to go, and that's when I discovered FOIA.
We really try and build a community here. It's what you want to see in a neighbourhood. You want to see people getting along and supporting each other wherever possible. And they're there for each other in the hard times, and they develop some really great friendships that last after they move out.
It's awesome to live at the foyer. Since I've been here, I've found a lot of independence and a lot of encouragement and confidence with going out and approaching people and jobs and stuff like that. So I've just currently moved into housing. Yep, they'll just help me move from here into the city, into a 1-bedroom apartment. Yeah, I'm quite nervous moving in, but I'm excited at the same time.
Been here about a year and 3 months. I guess it's helped me to adult a bit more. But I mean, we do have lots of support here, so if I needed any help majorly, I'd always come to the girls.
The support here is just absolutely amazing. Like, they're understandable. Like, if your situation doesn't fit you, then doesn't fit them, they'll adjust around and help you kind of become a better person and just to help you thrive. To me, having home is coming home to a place where you feel safe and you just feel welcome, like from the community, neighbours, like they'll greet you and there's no really threat around it. Support is kind of key to get the young people into the adult world.
They give you a clear picture, and it's really good to have people behind you who can support you, who've been through so much, they've been through life, and they can actually support you to do better. It is a family. It definitely is. It feels like a family because you have people there who are supporting you every day, checking up on you. What are you doing? Where is it going? I'm trying to work hard so I can move out and give space to someone else who needs it.
I hope to finish my apprenticeship, become a full-time carpenter, maybe start my own building company from it, and yeah.
Well, I just got a job yesterday, so that was really cool. So I'm doing retail marketing, so that's really flexible, which is really cool because I'm recording music at the moment too, so I get to do that on the side.
I'm doing a Cert 3 in hospitality, and I'm also looking forward to becoming a chef or a game developer in the future. My dream is to become a fully fledged chef first off before I even start gaming, and just become a full-fledged chef and hopefully either move to London or move to somewhere around England someday and then just live there and just kind of open my own restaurant up and just work there.
I am working on my business. It's a online retail business, and I'm also working on my feature film. I'm a filmmaker, and I just graduated from university actually yesterday. My graduation was yesterday.
In each of those cases, it's secure, supported housing that has been a catalyst for those young people's achievements. That's why today I'm very pleased to announce that we will be moving immediately to commence construction of 3 new facilities based on the Youth Foyer model. 2 of those will be in southeast Queensland and 1 will be in North Queensland, providing a capacity for hundreds and hundreds of young people to move through and tell stories just like those you saw. This type of supported accommodation will provide young people between 16 and 25 years old a pathway to security and to independence, a pathway to jobs, a pathway to training, a pathway away from things like the youth justice system and are likely ending up in our prisons. And for many young people, particularly those who are leaving our foster care system, this tailored support will be the first time they've been given the tools to tread their own path. It'll be this scaffolding and this economic independence and participation that will be part of the key themes that you will see when we release the 10-year housing strategy. We'll focus on building connections like these in communities, ensuring the most vulnerable community members are supported. And I'm also determined to ensure that we build a responsive housing system, one that's fair and one that we can all have confidence in. And of course, we do need to grow the number of affordable homes in Queensland, a shared responsibility with all of you that I'm determined to see through. So a lot of hard work has got us to this point, and Queensland is now just weeks away from having the most comprehensive housing plan for the country. All of your contributions to that significant piece of work have been invaluable, and I thank you. What I've found over the last 12 months is a broad understanding that things need to change, that allowing the status quo to continue will only widen the housing gap in Queensland. But if we embrace change together, focus on the things that matter, the housing needs of all Queenslanders, I have no doubt that Queensland will lead the nation in housing outcomes. And I look forward to embarking on this journey with all of you. Thank you.